Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In today's video, we're going to go over how to understand and memorize a little bit on Appendix C, the muscular system. At the end of the textbook, NASM does refer to Appendix C right off the bat. I think it's chapter 7, either lesson 4, somewhere around there where they speak to some of the functionality of the muscular system. It's a very, very important component in the sort of the field of biomechanics, even in kinesiology. The idea that the muscular system, acts as a total unit. Individual muscles, although they do have specific concentric, eccentric movement patterns associated with them through planes of motion, right? The reality is, and this is where I appreciate what NASM writes and the fact that they even have this appendix in there. The reality is that no muscle does one thing only. In fact, the reality is that every single skeletal muscle in your body has multiple functions in pretty much all the different planes of motion. And I don't want to get too much into that academic part of it because I want to give you specifics on how to deal with Appendix C. Again, once you get to chapter 7, and again, I forgot whether it's lesson 4, whatever it is, it's going to actually refer you to Appendix C. And here's what happens. And by the way, the reason I'm doing this specific video is because I was talking with a student. We were going over a couple of questions on the BDU, one of the BDU practice exams, and she had gotten this one question incorrect. And the reason is because, excuse me, for the most part, she wasn't really sure how to deal with understanding Appendix C. And for the most part, most folks don't even go into Appendix C. So I'm going to encourage you, if you've got to chapter 7 and it says refer to the muscular system, Appendix C, my suggestion, my encouragement is to actually go into it. I'm going to be honest with you. Personally, this is one of my favorite areas of study because it's mechanics for the most part, the mechanical nature of how muscles work over joints and the specificity of what they do, right? Concentrically, eccentrically. But then one of the more interesting things about the human muscular system is the isometric stabilizing components that all muscles, and again, I'm telling you, all muscles have as a normal part of their, quote, everyday life. Yeah, even your biceps, they don't just do dumbbell curls, right? They have stabilizing elements to them as well. Quite often what we focus on is not just muscles of the spinal column, the rectus spinae, and the pelvis, but we also look at musculature related to stabilizing the shoulder and the shoulder girdle. It's pretty important stuff when you're actually training people. In the athletic arena, it becomes even more critical. Now, again, from NASM's perspective, there's also the corrective exercise component. So you can see that on the spectrum where you have athleticism, right? Athletes, they really need to have it dialed in with stabilizers, especially track and field athletes, for instance. But there's also the other end of the spectrum, which are folks that are coming off of rehab, for instance, and physical therapy. Also critical that they develop the musculature appropriate to get them back into activities of daily living, ADLs. But nevertheless, as I move forward, let me pull up the digital right here for you as well. Now, look, I always try and keep the actual textbook available if I'm actually studying. Generally, now again, if this works for you, that's great. If it doesn't work for you, for sure, get the textbook so that you can literally get hands-on, read, write, and recite. I use the digital one here just so that we can kind of go through the actual video itself. It's easy to understand as well when you're looking at this. So if you've gone into Appendix C already, I just want to help you to understand a little bit about what it's trying to tell you. And if you read up here, the traditional perception of muscles, they work concentrically, predominantly in one plane of motion. So sagittal plane, right? Forward, backward, right? Flexion and extension, or frontal planar movement, right? So the frontal plane, abduction, adduction, transverse plane, rotational movement. That's the sort of the classical way of understanding human movement. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that in order to truly appreciate and understand the human muscular system, in the capacity that we work it in from an exercise programming perspective, it's a good idea to go past what we call the classical sort of academic textbook explanation of human movement into a more, sort of integrated understanding of how muscles work within all planes of motion, not as concentric and eccentric mobilizers of the skeleton, but as stabilizers. Now, another question that, and I was telling you about this student, another question that she had asked me was, well, how do I kind of know when a muscle is a stabilizer, right? And again, I'm referring you back to chapter 7, stabilizers, agonists, antagonists, synergist, right? All of these terms, if you're not familiar with them, can be a little confusing. And so the idea is that when you come into Appendix C, NASM has given you a list of all of these, the major muscles of the body. And I'm just going to run through it. If you have it, you can run through it with me. It may seem like a lot. Well, it is a lot. I mean, it's pretty much all of the major muscles. But here's what I want you to do. This is sort of the tip. And the reason I'm doing this video is I would like you to hone in on a couple of the things here that I, of course, find very interesting, but will make life easy for you. First and foremost, if you are trying to memorize the names of the muscles, good luck. That's just one of those sort of tips that you can use as far as mnemonics and trying to memorize the names. For the most part, you're going to have to read it and rewrite it over and over and over, simply to get the terms and the names in your head. There's nothing wrong with spending some time. Grab your pen, write down the names of the muscles. Anterior, and again, I would be here doing lower leg musculature. Now watch what I do. Again, the tips that I'm giving you are to help you if you've got the time. If you're taking a test in the next 3 weeks and you haven't even opened the book, I'm probably going to tell you not to spend a whole lot of time in Appendix C. You got a lot of time you got to spend in other chapters. But if you have the time, and you should, at least 60 days to 90 days, and you've been moving through the book and you're studying fairly consistently, then yes, absolutely, get some time in Appendix C. Here's how I do this. What NASM has done is they've given you, well, I'm just showing you, they've given you see how they give you this area of the body. So lower leg musculature. What I would do is on a sheet of paper is just go ahead and write lower leg. Now, don't write musculature, just write lower leg or lower leg muscles. And these are the ones that are important. See that? If you can't read it, don't worry about it. Lower leg musculature. And then from there, I would simply write those different muscles. The anterior tibialis, posterior tibialis. When I was going through school, it was called the tibialis anterior. But again, you can switch, just like the ATP-PC system, right? It could be the phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate. Don't let that get you. So anterior tibialis, posterior tibialis. That's 2. Let's keep going. The soleus, the gastroc. Now here's where we get into some, kind of issues, I think. We call this muscle the peroneus. If you want to call it the fibularis longus. I'm not saying you're going to have to memorize it, but it is an important muscle from the standpoint of functionality. It actually is. So if you're having struggles with this, just write it down and say it out loud, right? Peroneus longus, fibularis longus, whichever one you want to use. Now, you'll notice that was the lower leg. If you take these areas, lower leg musculature, a little, bite at a time, what were they? Do you remember? Don't look at the screen. Anterior tibialis, posterior tibialis, soleus, gastroc, peroneus. Okay, there's 5 muscles NASM wants you to essentially know in the lower leg. It includes a different what we call the different compartments, posterior, anterior, lateral. Okay. But the point is, is that you would do this in Appendix C. You would do this for each of these. See what I've done here? There we go, lower leg musculature. And I would write those muscles down. Now, again, you could just do that and memorize the names of these muscles. For the most part, I think you all have pretty much memorized at least two of them, right? The soleus and the gastroc, your calf, right? The other three, okay, you could say they're a little bit more challenging from a memorization standpoint, but the anterior and posterior tibialis, okay, that's fairly straightforward. Just write it down a couple of times. Peroneus, just write it down a couple of times. That's the way I would approach this and attack this in Appendix C. So once you've gotten to lower leg, and I'm just moving forward, now you get to the hamstring. And again, watch what I do. I've just done lower leg, anterior tibialis, posterior. By the way, if this is one of the first videos that you've watched in the series that we do with NASM Exam Prep, just understand you've got to put time up front. Okay, I call it front loading your study time, right? To be efficient in your studying, you've got to put a lot of time up front loaded, meaning spend a lot of time right from the get-go. Look at the material and write it down. I know it looks like it's a lot of time. I know it does, but I know it works also. And what works is when you read it and you rewrite it. Irrespective of your learning style, you still have to do this part of it. By the way, if you don't have an strong audiological component to your learning style, you still got to use it. Still do it anyway, because it's going to add to your more dominant learning style. The thing about learning styles is don't think that it's one way to study. You apply all of the methodologies, all of the strategies. It's just that one of them generally tends to be the one that really clicks for you. But you want to use all the different methodologies. So I would write it, read it, rewrite it, and then go to the next one, hamstring complex. I'd write that down. Biceps femoris. Let me do it so it's kind of like the way you'd be doing it. Biceps femoris. Okay, yeah, they separated into the long head and the short head. By the way, it's remember, the biceps femoris is one of three muscles in the hamstring complex. It's the only one that has two heads. So that kind of makes it easy. Long and short head. So you only have to write biceps femoris long head. And what I would do is I would just write an arrow. So biceps femoris, and I just do an arrow long. See the way I do this? I'm going to show it to you in a second. So what I do is I just say B femoris long short. Okay, that's just a short, quick, easy way to make it easier for my feeble brain to memorize some of these things. Okay, so then you have the other two hamstrings. Now, if you can't pronounce it, I always hear the funniest pronunciations for these. It's semimembranosus. I hear the craziest thing. So semimembranosus, and then the other one is what's known as the semi. I'm from New York, so forgive me for my pronunciation. Semitendinosus. So semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and those are your hamstring. That's the hamstrings complex. Look, I haven't even gotten into this part of it, the concentric, eccentric, isometric function. I don't want to do that yet. I want to help you just to memorize the names of some of these muscles. So again, the way you do it is say it over and over and over again to yourself. Write it down. If you write it and you're saying it to yourself, it's going to make a lot of sense. I know a lot of folks also have told me one thing that helps them. Yeah, of course, they'll do the index cards. Absolutely nothing wrong with those. My problem with index cards is that you're reading. Reading is not an efficient way to study unless you are the 0.1% of what we know is the human population that has the ability to read it and memorize it. Some people have a really good knowledge acquisition capability just by looking and reading it. Not many people. I don't know many people that have that skill or talent, whatever it is. It can be developed. But the point is that for the most part, you've got to rewrite it. Say it out loud. Semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris. By the way, take a second here. Close your eyes and tell me what the 5 muscles of the lower leg were. Lower leg musculature. What were they? Anterior and posterior tibialis, soleus gastrocnemius, and the peroneus longus or fibularis longus, right? So you see, if you do it over and over, you'll actually have nightmares. You won't forget. You won't be able to forget it. Okay, so same thing with the quadriceps. You would simply, let me go over the names. Vastus, large, Latin for large. Lateralis, where is it? It's on the lateral side of the leg, or the outer part of the leg, hence the term. It's one of the ways it was always easy for me to memorize some of the names of these muscles. So vastus, we call it, by the way, the 3 vastus muscles, we call them the vastus group in the quad. So quadriceps, you'd write that down, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis in the middle part, right? Or the inner, right? The medial aspect of the leg, and then the vastus intermedius. So those are your 3 vastus group muscles: vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and the intermedius lies underneath the rectus femoris, right? So again, femoral, femoris, right? And so the rectus femoris is the 4th muscle in that quad group, and you would do the same thing here. Here's where folks get a little bit squirrely and kind of take a side turn when it comes to memorizing muscles. Now we get to the hip musculature, adductor longus, right? Just stop, take a deep breath, write them down. Write it down, say it out loud. Write it down, say it out loud, and you will, it's almost a guarantee. Call me, let me know if you don't memorize it. Adductor magnus, write it down. Adductor magnus. Okay, so anterior front fibers, posterior fibers. Yes, there. And by the way, NASM's being nice to you, just so you understand. They're actually being nice to you because there's a lot more intricacy and precision to neuromuscular control attributes of these muscles. And so they're just giving you, these main areas. So anterior, posterior, adductor, either brevis or brevis. I say brevis. You say tomato. I say tomato. The gracilis, which just, at kids' parties, you can tell somebody, hey, what's the longest muscle in the body? Lengthwise, it's the sartorius, and I'm just messing around with you. Gracilis is a muscle that is responsible for adduction, of course, and so you would just write it down. The pectineus, okay, pectineus or pectineus, gluteus medius. See, all I'm doing is I'm just working through. Now, again, here's what you're doing. You're thinking to yourself, oh my God, look at all these. Oh boy. Oh my goodness. There's pages and pages and pages. And the answer to that concern is, well, yeah, but given there's 600 plus different muscles on your body, all you're doing is going through, I forgot how many there are here, 30 or something, but it's not a whole lot. You already know the names of most of them. So just think about it this way. You can take the muscles, compartmentalize it as the way they have it listed as far as breaking it into groups. Let me come forward here again to show you. Abdominal musculature. Don't try and memorize page after page. Break it into smaller parts, right? So hamstring complex, quadriceps, hip musculature, right? Abdominal musculature. And of course, they'll give you, and if you've gone through the majority of those chapters already, you would start to get familiar with some of these muscles. And then the reason it's important is because, and I'm going to stay right here for you and help you out now, because once you go through and kind of memorize those names, which shouldn't take you very long. Now, this is one of the best things I think that NASM actually did. They actually show you the main functions of the muscles. And here's what you're going to notice. This is what I wanted to get to for you, is for the most part, for the most part, what do you see? What do you see here? Stabilizes the lumbo or the LPHC. That's interesting because so does this one. And interesting. So does this one. Stabilize. Now, it's not isometric, but it stabilizes the lumbo-pelvic hip complex. What are you going to start to see? You're going to see lots of similarities. Now, there's going to be differences in certain ones, especially with the back musculature. Let me jump back over to the beginning. Look at this, the isometric. Now, by the way, the concentric and eccentric is in those particular planes of motion that you would be talking about with a particular muscle, right? So concentrically accelerates, okay, dorsiflexion and inversion. Again, I don't know how to explain this to you any better, but you need to memorize the terms and what they mean. What is dorsiflexion, right? If I was to ask you, what is dorsiflexion? What is inversion of the foot? You got to go back and you've got to memorize it. Okay, well, dorsiflexion is in the sagittal plane, and it is when the toe or the foot raises up, right? So eversion and inversion is the way the foot inverts and everts inward and outward, right? Looking at the bottom of the foot, everts and inverts, right? Those are just standard movement patterns that you need to memorize. And if you come here and you go, man, I don't even know, well, go back to those particular chapters, or heck, you can Google it, right? And just write it down. Inversion, eversion. Sometimes you need to draw pictures. That's why I got markers. I always use markers. If I got to draw a picture, you can literally say that if the foot, and they've got pictures of it, if the foot everts or inverts. I'm not going to show you that picture because it doesn't make any sense. But you get the idea. You can draw a picture. You can get a picture of a foot, and you can show how it inverts and everts. Okay, that's now what these are going to tell you. They're not difficult to memorize and understand. I was telling you that some students have told me they just literally, when they're working out, they're doing it, and they're thinking about the movement patterns. You can do it right here. Elbow flexion, elbow extension. You can actually look at the muscle, and with your foot, you can't see my foot, but I'm going to dorsiflex it, invert it, evert it. Okay, got it. And now you can connect the muscle with those particular movements. Here's where I wanted you to look at the isometric function, because one of the things that I was talking to this one student about was the concept of stabilizing muscles are endurance-based muscles, right? Those muscles, particularly in the hip complex and the shoulder complex, shoulder girdle, that are predominantly isometric stabilizers, because that's what stabilizers are. They're isometric. They tend to stay in isometric contractions, but they do so at low grade power output. So they have to be able to stay isometrically contracted for extended periods of time, which means they have to have endurance. And so that was kind of the question, and that's what prompted me to go through this. So what you're going to notice is that, again, look at the isometric function. What is isometric? What is iso? Same, right? Same. Iso, like an isosceles triangle. Isosceles triangle, same length, right? A triangle where all the sides are the same length. Iso. So isometric. Metric is the word for length, right? So the metric system is technically a length-based system. You want to say it like that. So isometric, same length. So an isometric contraction is when the muscle is tensed, but it's not lengthening or shortening. It is not lengthening like an eccentric contraction, and it's not shortening like a concentric contraction. So it's isometrically stabilized, right? So it contracts and holds while all this stuff do their thing. Okay, so for instance, if I'm going to lift my arm out to the side, right? What's the dominant agonist muscle that's working to abduct my arm? It's the deltoid, but there's lots of other stuff going on inside my shoulder girdle, right? There are muscles that are not shortening and lengthening. They're literally holding and tightening the humeral head into the glenoid fossa of the scapula and holding it there while the deltoid moves it. Right, so they shorten and they hold, isometric contractions. And what I want you to do in Appendix C is I want you to kind of look at the isometric functions of a lot of the muscles in these particular areas that NASM is giving you. You'll notice again that the anterior tibialis and the posterior tibialis do what? The exact same thing. They stabilize the arch of the foot. Okay. Whatever that means. Okay. Isometrically stabilizes the foot and ankle complex. Isometrically stabilizes the foot and ankle. Wait a minute. Did I stutter? No, it's the same thing. And again, you're going to see this throughout the entire Appendix C. Anytime you're studying, okay, let me get out of here. Look, anytime you're studying your goal, especially with tables and charts, I've spoken about this in other videos, try and figure out a way to condense the material, draw connections without getting overwhelmed and overloaded with the information. When you see information that is the same, connected, try and pull them together. That's why you don't read it. Reading is not studying. How many times have you heard that? Well, if this is your first time watching a video, it's the first time, but most of the videos that we do, I'm going to tell you the same thing. Reading is not studying. Let that sink in for a second. Reading is not studying. It is the beginning of studying. You have to read it, but then you now have to do the work of getting it up here in your brain. If you read it, you'll have in some cases, little to no retention of information. You got to memorize this stuff. You got to know it. You got to know the terms. You got to know what they do. So I could, of course, go on and on with that. But look, for the most part, I think you get the idea. Appendix C, again, I love the way NASM has put together their materials. And Appendix C is a really, it's not difficult. It's just a couple of pages, one bite at a time, a little bit at a time. Memorize the lower leg musculature. And after a while, I'm telling you, it's just going to come to you like this. All right. I would say, yes, for sure. The one area that most folks will have a struggle with is going to be in the LPHC and the, in the hip pelvic region, trying to memorize some of those muscles. But it's really cool the way these muscles work and interact. Very complex sort of sequence dance that they have to do to make sure that you can simply walk and stand up. So it's actually pretty cool. And if you see it or you take it from that context, guarantee you're going to love memorizing the names of the muscles and what they do concentrically, eccentrically. But again, it's that isometric stabilizing element to the muscles that you want to look at. And you're going to notice that for the most part, they're all fundamentally the same in what they do isometrically, depending on the area that you're looking at. So get into Appendix C, right? If you've got the time, for sure, just let us know if you have any questions related to this or any other topic. We're here to help you out at Body Design University. Remember to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell so that you know when all the new material is coming out. You can also go to our Facebook page. Yes, we have private study groups for the NASM exam prep. So go ahead and visit us there, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.